Kia ora everyone, welcome back to our next edition of Econ Talks. Gareth, we've had a pretty incredible result again, and I feel like we say that just about every time we update our numbers, right? Unemployment, though, falling to 3.4% on a seasonally adjusted basis in the September 2021 quarter, the equal lowest on record since 1986. The only other time we had this 3.4% was back in the December 2007 quarter, before the GFC came through and swept us off our feet. It's very clear at the moment that we have an incredibly tight labour market. There's no spare capacity really to be found just about anywhere, and we know that businesses are really starting to see those pressures build. What got me, of course, is that this still was part of the period when we had level 4 lockdown that came through, and then an extended level 3 for parts of the country up until the end of September. And although there was a marginal difference between what the unemployment rate might have been without that sort of lockdown hit, the figures sort of speak for themselves. Not only did you have a massive fall in unemployment, but you had a pretty considerable boost in employment itself. 2% on a quarterly basis is a pretty big jump, nearly 55,000 additional people. As well as that, we saw the underutilisation rate fall to 9.2%. We'd actually been expecting that might have ticked up because people throughout, again, the period might have been unable to work quite as much because of lockdowns and similar. But wow, I mean, the labour market at the moment, very much through the Reserve Bank's position of maximum sustainable employment. What is that meaning for businesses? What are they reporting in terms of the struggles at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, for the course of this year, businesses have been saying that staffing is getting harder and harder to get. You go back a year and it was mainly in the construction industry where conditions were booming anyway, but now it's right across the economy, and whether it's skilled or highly skilled or lower skilled staff, it's just really difficult to find them. I think what was most interesting in the most recent survey that we saw around the labour market, though, was that businesses were also very worried about labour turnover. The responses in terms of what their expectations for how much turnover there would be over the next 3 or 6 months skyrocketed through the most recent quarter, and we've seen a few reports and surveys around that as well, which have suggested there may be a lot more people looking to jump ship and go and work for the guy down the road because he's desperate for staff and is going to offer you that much more and a much better package as well. So yeah, those surveys are really confirming just the stresses that businesses are meeting and struggling to sort of keep up with the demand as people come in the door and want to buy stuff and have stuff made, and so really tight in the labour market and lining up with the big drop in the unemployment rate and the growth in employment that we've seen. And at the same time, of course, the borders are still shut, and you've got that inability to source workers from overseas as well.
It does seem to be sort of this conversation that people are having around the world about the possible great resignation, but also, I guess, with those pressures on businesses, with, really employees in the driver's seat now when it comes to where they might locate themselves and what they're able to get from the boss, we are starting to see wage rates starting to creep up, probably not as fast in a sense, to be honest, than we might have been expecting. The LCI, the labour cost index this quarter, up 2.4% per annum. That's, increasing, accelerating from 2.1% last quarter, but really that sort of number only takes us back to where we were sort of pre-pandemic. It's not particularly incredible. What gets me as well when we look at the distribution of increases to pay over the last year is we've now had, I think, 82% of New Zealanders who either didn't have a pay rise in the last year or whose pay rise was below inflation. And so again, very much for every step forward that workers are having, 2 steps back in terms of their purchasing power. And I think there are real concerns around that. As you've noted as well, though, Gareth, the pressures that we're seeing on businesses are just as much around actual demand, people wanting to buy stuff because there's so much cash, in a sense, floating around, as the limitations on finding labour and finding skilled labour. I mean, surely this is going to mean that the Reserve Bank does have to start to look to increase interest rates even further. I mean, is a 50 basis point hike on the cards again?
Look, I don't know about the Reserve Bank's thinking on those 50-point hikes because they seem to have steered away from them in terms of some of their recent comments. But I mean, the strength of that number again, we were by far the most optimistic in terms of the unemployment rate, and it even beat our expectations. So I don't think you can rule it out. But the pressures are immense there in terms of, for interest rates, sort of estimates of what the unemployment rate the Reserve Bank might be comfortable with. It's going to be a number starting with 4, probably somewhere between 4 and 4.5 in that range. And the fact that we're now more than a percentage point below that 4.5 area does mean that pressure on interest rates is very substantial. And like you say, you mentioned wage rates. They haven't done a lot yet, but there is a heck of a lot of pressure there, given both the bargaining power or increasing bargaining power that employees have, but also the fact that, yeah, they do want more money to keep up with the cost of living, which is going up at 5% a year at the moment. So that's going to feed through. It's just going to intensify those cost pressures and ultimately broader inflationary pressures across the economy as well. So look, even if they don't go 50 basis points at the next review, there's going to be plenty of interest rate rises coming through in the pipeline through 2022.
And I guess the big one for me is that so much of the starting conditions are so much stronger. You had Q2 GDP coming in at 2.8% on a quarterly basis, far stronger than was expected by the Reserve Bank. Inflation coming at 4.9, again considerably stronger than expected, and then unemployment coming in at 3.4%. Not only far better in a sense than expected by the Reserve Bank, but even the retail banks who were forecasting up until the week before, they were picking anywhere from 4 to 3.8. We like you say, we were pretty happy with 3.5. Given that all of those starting positions are so far better, I think the Reserve Bank's in a tricky situation, because the risk ride of things going bad and the Reserve Bank needing to respond are absolutely there. But for the first time in a long time, the reality, the current on-the-ground situation is that the economy is hotter, the labour market is hotter, and prices are hotter. They're not expected to be in a better position in a year's time. They are here, right here and now, and that's quite different for the Reserve Bank to have to grapple with. The thing that gets me as well is that although we are still incredibly cautious about the economy, uncertainty remains, don't get me wrong, but so far the indicators are showing incredible resilience. We look at the likes of the ANZ Business Outlook surveys, particularly for Auckland. And in fact, what we saw in October was that business confidence for businesses' own activity increased in Auckland. It got better. We've also seen, of course, a number of filled jobs across the economy in Auckland and the rest of the country go up, not down in recent times. And importantly for me, the number of job seekers on a main benefit has been falling for the last 4 to 5 weeks. And so although we had a bit of an increase because of the Delta outbreak, we've now had things that are trending back in the right position. So there are risks, there are concerns about the economy, but by goodness, at the moment we have a lot of very strong activity. And the reality, I think, for the Reserve Bank is they've got to look what's right in front of them in the here and now, rather than just what they think might be coming in the future. There seems to be still too much stimulus in the economy and a real need to start to temper that back.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, you mentioned those 3 indicators, GDP, labour market and inflation. You put those all together, gosh, if ever there was a time you were going to raise by 50 basis points, this has got to be it. I mean, you can't have it. Those are all off the chart in terms of the strength of them. And yes, okay, we've had a Delta outbreak and a bit of a lockdown since then, but our experience from 2020 is that didn't really derail the economy, and all the indicators are that this one hasn't derailed the economy as well. I know this again in Auckland, and certain businesses are going to be finding it tough, but they are by and large in the minority rather than the majority. And the Reserve Bank, look, you've had too much stimulus in the economy, not the Reserve Bank's fault given what we've been going through, but the issue now is that if you're playing catch up, it means that you do actually have to react that much more greatly or markedly in terms of your response. If you're ahead of the curve, you can go gently and keep on top of things. But the Reserve Bank is now running a real risk of having to play catch up. And the longer they sort of go with that softly approach, the greater the chances that you're needing to really bring out the big hammer in 2022 and enact not just one 50-point rise, but you could be looking at multiples of that. And that's when you're starting to have real sort of volatility or variability in the economy, because you're getting outcomes that are sort of almost overreactive, but you've been forced into that position.
Absolutely, and I think the big one from my point of view for the Reserve Bank also is that if there is a need in the next 6 months and the next 12 months to need to cut rates, it's better surely to have a few more basis points in your back pocket than fewer. At the moment, right, we have that expansionary policy that was broadly speaking put in place at a time we thought the economy was falling down around our ears. It's not, and it surely stands to reason that we need to take some of that emergency stimulus away. If you need it again, you can always put it back on. But like you say, the risk of removing it too slowly and letting things start to snowball quicker and quicker means we could have inflation running at a considerably higher pace for a longer period of time, and those issues that come forward in terms of price stability or the lack thereof, I think could well be quite damaging, and we're seeing that coming out across the world. Look, we'll continue to monitor that, where the labour market goes, who's got a job, who hasn't, and what they're getting paid, and if they're taking a step forward or a step back. All of that and more on one of our future editions of Econ Talks.